not want people losing their homes because banks are distressed and because they are distressed and they can't pay the mortgage.
Quick response to that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Bill's right on the money. And that's why I've called for a negative OCR, so that banks can actually have leverage to do that. You can imagine that people like Bill and myself would be very thankful for a 1 to 2 year 0.25% mortgage rate, but those other distressed customers are equally important. And then on the other side, making sure we've got cheaper debt, our smaller business can restructure or consolidate or extend credit, have cheaper overdrafts, so they too can ride out.
Good to have you on the program.
So,
yeah.
Great.
Dr. David Wilson there, founder of Cities and Regions, independent research consultancy, also part of the advisory panel for the Provincial Growth Fund. On a lighter note to end the program, and actually I must warn you, it's a very light note for something completely... and it's not your dreams, but for something very different, because we need something else to think about. Have either of you seen the film Cats? It was lauded. Julia?
No, thankfully.
No.
Well, it was lauded as one of the worst films ever made, and now it's officially swept the awards show, the Razzies. Yes, that's the one for the bad films. This year's event was cancelled due to the coronavirus concerns. The winners were instead revealed through YouTube video, which they described as suitable for viewing by any audience currently in lockdown mode. Here's that special moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, the biggest berry of them all, Worst Picture. And the last nominees are Cats. Think of it as 50 Shades of What the F***. The Herald Sun, Australia. The Fanatic. The Haunting of Sharon Tate. A Medea Family Funeral. Oops. And Rambo Last Blood. It's basically Taken meets Home Alone, only racist. The winner for Worst Picture is Cats.
These are people, but they're cats, and this is kind of blowing my mind. There's nothing else like it.
Now that Cats is out of the bag and bagged 6 statuettes, the 40th Annual Razzie Awards are finally over.
Can you imagine James Corden, Rebel Wilson, both in cat suits? You know, I mean, it's okay. I can handle. What's her name? The rock star, Taylor Swift in a cat suit. But no.
It's quite tragic, isn't it? Because it was destined for great things, but it's one of those things, Julie, that didn't really appeal to me. I don't know about you, where you stand with musicals, but I was just thinking of the worst movie I'd ever seen. Does one come to mind for you?
The worst movie I've ever seen.
Oh.
The worst movie I ever saw was when Star Wars was all full up in the late 70s, and Dad said, what about Across the Road? There's a great movie, and it's called Breaker Breaker, starring Chuck Norris. It was terrible.
The worst
that's
movies
in the
we've ever
times,
seen.
so
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Would be bad. Every now and again, I get locked into Netflix and I end up watching the worst movies I've ever seen, and most of them, unfortunately, star. Oh God, I've forgotten his name now. But they're all '90s movies.
Oh yes,
Morgan Freeman.
Oh, Julia Whaipuri, Bill Rolston, you've been wonderful this afternoon. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thanks, Wallace. Take care out there, whānau.
Take care, everybody. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint next. See you Monday, 3:45. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, a $900 million government loan keeps Air New Zealand airborne, but it won't stop job losses. 11 new cases of COVID-19 are confirmed here. All are linked to international travel. The Prime Minister joins us live. Auckland Council battens down the hatches, shutting libraries, gyms, museums and rec centres for at least 2 weeks. Supermarkets move to widespread rationing and shorter opening hours to halt the grocery grab. And schools could act as food hubs for communities in need if we're locked down. The New Zealand Warriors will stay in Australia in the NRL Premiership. And Christchurch is abuzz with complaints about the Police Eagle helicopter. Don't forget you can watch us live on Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The total number of coronavirus cases has risen today from 28 to 39, and some of them may be the first in this country to have been caused by community transmission. At this stage, health officials are unable to deny that possibility. Charlotte Cook reports.
5 of the new cases are from Auckland, 2 each from Waikato and Wellington, Hawke's Bay and Canterbury. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says most of the new cases have a link to international travel, but officials have so far been unable to confirm the circumstances of some Wellington and Auckland cases. Dr Bloomfield says none of the new cases are in hospital. This is Charlotte Cook.
The opposition says the government has made the right call in bailing out Air New Zealand. The Finance Minister today announced a $900 million loan to the airline, which says its weekly number of flights has plummeted from more than 3,500 to 1,500. National's finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says all the country can do is back Air New Zealand to work through this extraordinary period.
I think the support to Air New Zealand makes sense, and National supports it. Air New Zealand is a critical piece of our national infrastructure and an important company. And they're going to have to make big changes, but it's important that they continue.
Air New Zealand's share price fell by nearly half today before closing down about a third. The National Museum Te Papa Tongarewa is closing to the public in an hour's time and will stay shut for at least 2 weeks to help reduce the risk of COVID-19. Board Chair Dame Fran Wild says it's unable to enforce social distancing and the well-being of the public must be the number one focus. She says staff will keep working in the museum's Wellington offices following the guidance of health authorities. Te Papa will review the situation after 2 weeks and advise the public of its status on April the 3rd. Meanwhile, the Auckland Council is closing its libraries, pools and recreational centres for an initial period of 2 weeks. The city's War Memorial Museum, Art Gallery and Maritime Museum will also close, but the zoo is staying open. Sarah Robson reports.
The Mayor Phil Goff says the decision to close facilities wasn't an easy one, but far too many people go through the doors of libraries, swimming pools and leisure centres to run them safely in light of the current situation. Venues run by Regional Facilities Auckland, including the Civic Theatre, the Auckland Town Hall, Shed 10 and the Cloud, are also shut. As an outdoor experience, the zoo will stay open for now, but with extra health and safety measures in place. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
California's governor has issued an unprecedented order telling the state's 40 million residents to stay home for the foreseeable future. Gavin Newsom's directive, effective immediately, marks the largest and most sweeping US clampdown yet in the worsening public health crisis. On the basis of modelling by experts, Mr Newsom is predicting COVID-19 could infect more than half the state within 8 weeks. Already more than 1,000 Californians have been confirmed as infected and 18 have died, the third largest death toll in the US behind Washington State and New York. India has executed 4 men for a notorious gang rape and murder on a bus in Delhi in 2012. The men were hanged at dawn in a prison in the city after their final appeals for clemency were dismissed. The victim, a 23-year-old physiotherapy student who cannot be named under Indian law, died from her injuries 9 days after being raped. The attack caused widespread outrage and led to the tightening of rape law. However, similar violent incidents still make headlines in India. 2 people have been found to have intentionally lit fires in the Tinder-Dry Tasman area last year. A short time ago, the jury in the High Court in Wellington found both Benjamin Durant and Abigail Page guilty on arson charges. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Netball Players Association has backed Netball New Zealand's decision to postpone the ANZ Premiership for 2 weeks, now that indoor gatherings of more than 100 people have been banned by the government. The association's executive manager, Steph Bond, says even with the public shut out of games, they came close to 100 people.
We were kind of there or thereabouts, so to be honest, it was the right call to make to say, you know, we're near that limit. So to say that if we were at 98 we were okay didn't really make much sense, really.
The change affects second and third round games due to be played over the next 2 weekends. The Warriors have reaffirmed their commitment to playing the rest of the NRL Premiership season in Australia, despite New Zealand and Australia closing their borders. Chief Executive Cameron George is now calling on rugby league fans on both sides of the Tasman to get behind the side during what he describes as testing times.
And we're calling on this nation, both here and our fans in Australia, to watch and cheer as loud as you can on the TVs every time, because these guys have just done something that I think a lot of people would have taken up.
New Zealand Rugby League has postponed the Oceania Cup Test matches scheduled for June between the Kiwis and Tonga Invitational 13 and the Kiwi Ferns and Whetu Samoa. That's the news.
Now, a public health message from the Ministry of Health. The government is advising New Zealanders not to travel overseas. This is the first time this level of advice has been issued and reflects the seriousness of the COVID-19 situation. In addition, new travel restrictions have been placed on visitors coming to New Zealand, with self-isolation still required for citizens and residents returning from overseas. Restrictions on gatherings of more than 100 people indoors have also been announced. For further information on these announcements and for self-isolation advice for those who have travelled, visit covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Peninsula. Scattered showers clearing and becoming fine tonight, but isolated showers remaining in Northland. Bay of Plenty, isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. Remaining North Island regions, showers developing this evening, clearing early tomorrow, then mainly fine with areas of cloud about the west coast. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland mainly fine. Rain spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms from the afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough, some showers developing tonight, fine tomorrow morning, then cloud increasing and scattered rain developing from late afternoon. Canterbury mostly cloudy, any remaining areas of drizzle clearing today, scattered rain developing from about midday tomorrow. Otago and Southland fine today, cloud with scattered rain tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a period of afternoon rain, then a few showers clearing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. New Zealanders are tonight being warned to be kind and remain calm after panic buying yesterday left supermarket shelves across the country empty. Supermarket owners say they have plenty of stock to go round but can't replenish shelves or resume home deliveries if people continue to do more than their normal weekly shop. It comes as the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, revealed more cases of COVID-19 today, all linked to travel, and they're now in self-isolation.
11 new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand have been confirmed in the past 24 hours, and that brings our total number of cases to 39. Where public health staff have fully investigated these cases, there is a clear link to overseas travel. In several other cases, the test results were only confirmed this morning, and these are still being followed up fully. Of these 11 new cases, 5 are in Auckland, 2 in the Waikato region, 2 in the Wellington region, and 1 each in Canterbury and Hawke's Bay.
No cases are in hospital except for one man in his 60s from yesterday who's in a stable condition at Lakes District Hospital. Dr. Bloomfield says the ministry is increasing the number of tests it does to rule out community transmission.
Any hint that we have, like the canary in the mine of community spread, would lead us to think about what other measures we need to put in place. But in a sense, and someone described it to me this morning, we want to ask the canary how they're feeling before they even feel unwell. So we're looking really carefully, and that's why our testing and our inquiry into any positive tests, especially around that overseas travel link, is very important.
Today's new cases are in Auckland, Wellington, Waikato, Hawke's Bay and Canterbury and include travellers from Los Angeles, London, Paris and Munich. Dr. Bloomfield says 1,000 tests were completed yesterday and they have the capacity to do more.
If we see from the last 24 hours, we've had 11 positive tests, and nearly 1,000 negative tests. All of those would have been in people who had symptoms that could be suggestive of COVID-19 and had either a travel history or had a link to a close contact or a close contact of a confirmed or probable case, or where the clinician felt it was worth doing. So I think we are seeing quite wide testing, and that's helping assure us that we don't have any community spread yet.
The government has imposed strict travel and gathering restrictions which have caused communities to limit facilities. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff announced the city's libraries, pools, council buildings and other recreational centres will close for 2 weeks from today, in line with the government's recommendations. The Christchurch City Council says it will soon release its own plans, but Wellington and Dunedin Council say they have no immediate plans to follow Auckland's lead. New Plymouth has shut 2 of its busiest facilities, Todd Energy Aquatic Centre and Pukeariki, and Brooklyn Zoo remains closed following WOMAD. Southern DHB is alerting people to various locations where they may have come in contact with a Spanish tourist who has COVID-19 and is currently in Lakes District Hospital. These are all considered to be low-risk casual contacts. That means contact of less than 15 minutes and further than 2 metres apart. But the DHB says its contact tracing team is unable to get specific information about the infected man's activities in these locations, so has released the following general details. The man was in central Christchurch on March 13 between 6 and 8 in the evening. On March 16, he was at Dunedin Railway Station between midday and 3 in the afternoon, and in Lumsden on March 17th between 6 and 7 p.m. People who believe they may have come in contact with this case are advised to monitor their health and call Healthline on 0800 358 5453 if they develop symptoms such as a cough, fever, sore throat or difficulty breathing. Taxpayers have flown to the rescue of Air New Zealand, with the Crown loaning our national airline $900 million to save it from almost certain collapse. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says the aviation sector is in turmoil across the world and the government has to be fluid and unprecedented in its response as the COVID-19 crisis worsens. The impact is very real for Air New Zealand staff, with news today that 30% of its workforce will no longer be needed. Our political reporter Joe Moore has the story.
With the Crown having a 52% stake in Air New Zealand, a bailout of sorts was inevitable. It came in the form of a $900 million loan, with an option to convert it into shares down the track. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says that's not the plan, and Air New Zealand's confident it can pay back the debt.
This option was chosen because it was able to be moved forward at pace to avoid any disorderly situation and to continue to secure an airline for New Zealand.
But he's not making any future predictions.
This is an agreement that facilitates Air New Zealand's cash flow needs and continuing to operate. I'm not going to make comments today about where I think we'll be in 3, 6, 9 months' time, because nobody can say that.
Without this, Mr Robertson says the airline was about to tank.
The risk was real. It's quite clear that in a company of Air New Zealand's status that they have been in discussions with their banks. It was clear that unless we stepped in, there wasn't this kind of financing facility likely to be available from anywhere else.
The funding will support the airline's operations as it manages the implications of border restrictions and substantial reductions in travel demand. But even then, Air New Zealand's new chief executive, Greg Foran, paints a gloomy picture.
You know, an 85% reduction in revenue from international, and that will probably go down even smaller. You know, a 65, 75, 60 to 70% reduction in revenue in domestic now.
The hope is it will provide some certainty to Air New Zealand employees and those who rely on the national carrier. But the airline will continue to reduce staff, with options including leave without pay, working part-time, taking leave, voluntary exit and redundancies. Today's news came in the same week Qantas suspended international flights from the end of March until at least the end of May, and Virgin Australia warned redundancies would be unavoidable. Mr Foran says Air New Zealand flights have fallen from 3,600 a week to below 1,500 as the effects of COVID-19 deepen. Airlines in the future will look entirely different, and while Air New Zealand may be scaled back to a shell of its former self, the government is adamant the country will come out of this crisis with a national carrier. That's perhaps reflected in the fact Mr Foran says the airline got what it asked for.
You know, as we've gone through our forecasts and worked that out, $900 million is the right number for us. I can't speculate any more than anyone else on how long this will go and the impact, but based on our best forecast, we're very happy with that number.
National's finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says all the country can do is back Air New Zealand to work through this extraordinary period.
I think the support to Air New Zealand makes sense, and National supports it. Air New Zealand is a critical piece of our national infrastructure and an important company. And they're going to have to make big changes, but it's important that they continue.
The government is also working with Air New Zealand on repatriation flights to get home the more than 100,000 New Zealanders currently travelling overseas. It may be contracted to run charter flights alongside other international airlines and the Defence Force, as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs conducts the largest consular exercise it's ever undertaken. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
New Zealanders stuck overseas are paying thousands of dollars to get home. In many cases, they've no idea if they'll be allowed to board flights or whether more flights will be cancelled due to COVID-19. Some are pinning their hopes on government mercy flights, but with up to 110,000 New Zealand citizens and residents currently overseas, some face a long wait. Ruth Hill reports.
An idyllic seaside village in Guatemala has become a prison for Matthew Taylor and Amelia Nisbet, with the whole country in complete lockdown. Having spent the last 3 years in London, the Christchurch couple were taking the scenic route home through Central America when the pandemic struck. Their village has since been cordoned off.
Yeah, they cut off the water supply to the little village, so we had to drive for ages to pick up water and stuff like that. And now, last night, the police came in with big guns and stuff like that, and they wanted to check everyone's temperature. I suppose, just in case something goes wrong, and it also puts some sort of intimidation out there to make sure people conform.
Matthew Taylor says a water truck was allowed into the village today after the driver had his temperature checked, but he's worried they're going to be stuck there for a while.
I was speaking to a travel agent who reckons that it'll go for longer and just sort of sit tight.
So you're not even trying to book flights at this stage?
No, you can't. There's literally nothing. And like I said before, our biggest fear is trying to leave the town, go to Guatemala City, and then boom, they shut this country for another 2 weeks, and then we're really up shit creek.
Mark Watson and Hannah Black, who are also from Christchurch, have been away from home for nearly 4 years on an epic cycling journey from Alaska to Chile. They have a flight booked to the capital, Santiago, for Friday, and then intended to fly to Auckland via Buenos Aires. But with Air New Zealand now suspending all services from Argentina for 90 days, they are effectively stuck.
Qantas have already announced that they're ceasing operations in Latin America, as far as I know, at the end of the month, and we're not sure whether LATAM will continue or not. And another one of the issues for us is that the prices are insane. We've seen prices anywhere from $5,000 US to $14,000 US each for a flight out via LATAM.
The couple are in a remote part of Patagonia without road access. Mark Watson has kidney problems and high blood pressure and fears being unable to access medical services if the lockdown continues.
There is going to be an issue here potentially with fuel and food supply, as well as medicine and those sorts of things. Coyhaique is the main hospital for the entire ASEAN region of Chile. I can't imagine they have many ICU beds or ventilators, so if COVID-19 does take a strong hold here, then it will be a big problem for the region.
He's frustrated by the lack of official information from New Zealand.
Something that we're really finding difficult is the lack of information. We're not hearing a whole lot from the consulate, really, that we should just be putting pressure on the airlines to find out what's going on. But despite Air New Zealand cancelling our flight, they haven't contacted us. The only thing we can find out via the app is that they're processing a change, is literally what it says. But there's been no email and no further information about how that might manifest.
New Zealand journalist Stacey Knott, who has been living in Ghana for 4.5 years with her husband John, says the country only has a handful of cases, but has closed the borders to foreigners, shut down schools and universities, and banned public gatherings.
Yeah, I'm very 50-50 at the moment. If I should stay here, if I should go. And I'm well, if I go back to New Zealand, then, you have to make that decision quite quickly because flights are sort of cancelling left, right and centre. I think I actually know someone who tried to leave from Ghana to go back to New Zealand today and the flights were cancelled, so they're trying again tomorrow.
Stacey Knott says while the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has said publicly that partners and dependents of citizens will be allowed to come to New Zealand, she cannot get official confirmation.
So then I've been speaking with an immigration lawyer and trying to figure out, well, does that mean that he would have to have a visa? Because my partner has never come to New Zealand. We've been here for the whole time when we used to live in the UK as well. I'm pretty sure you'd still have to have a visa, and will that be any easier under these circumstances?
According to Statistics New Zealand, between 100,000 and 110,000 New Zealand residents were travelling overseas as of mid-March. Of these, about 2/3 are New Zealand citizens, with the rest permanent residents or on work and student visas. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says talks are underway with Air New Zealand and other airlines about repatriation flights.
Clearly there is a need at the moment around repatriation. As I say, most New Zealanders are getting on flights, coming home. There are some people who may have some difficulties with that. That's the work that MFAT's doing now.
Grant Robertson says it's the largest consular exercise ever undertaken by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the government is committed to bringing New Zealanders home. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
It is almost 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, we're keen for your feedback on this issue. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The New Zealand Warriors are defying the odds and will continue to play in the NRL Premiership for as long as the rugby league competition continues this season. Warriors CEO Cameron George announced the club's position today and says the players demonstrated exceptional commitment to both the club and fans. It means the players will remain in Australia and away from their families for an undefined length of time. George says now is a time for the club to be leaders in the rugby league community. The NRL will be played behind closed doors due to the coronavirus, and the Warriors will play all home games in Australia this season, including Saturday night's games against the Canberra Raiders on the Gold Coast.
Sometimes when adversity hits you in the face, that's when our true leaders stand up, and our team are showing that now, and the fans are really responding to that. Regardless of the footy results, one thing I can promise you that these guys aren't walking away from the challenge ahead. Through the course of the week, they've had to use our local clubs' jumpers. They've had to tape the GPS stuff to their arms during training because the jumpers couldn't cater for that because they're not in Australia. We've had to buy balls, we've had to borrow tape. We've had to do all sorts of things, and we can't thank the people of northern New South Wales and the Gold Coast enough for their support during the week too. So all in all, we're very stoked. It's business now, and it's onwards and upwards to Canberra Raiders tomorrow. But I do not want to underestimate the support that the families are giving the players through this difficult time, and also the players. To see them stand tall in these challenges and represent our fans and club and really make a decision in the best interest of the game before anything else, I think the rugby league community in Australia and New Zealand should be very proud of them.
And that was the Warriors' Chief Executive, Cameron George there. Well, joining me now is the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Kia ora, good evening, Prime Minister. Kia ora. There has been talk from the Deputy Prime Minister about potential mercy flights to get some people home from New Zealand. I mean, how far along is planning? How likely is that?
Well, actually, at the moment, what we still have, obviously, as you will have seen today, Air New Zealand still operating, and we have worked to secure and protect and preserve those services from Air New Zealand. As you will have heard, without the intervention we made today of a loan facility to the airline, there was a risk that we would have lost that connectivity. As part of that agreement, it means that we will be able to keep essential flights going, including ensuring Kiwis can return home.
So you may not need the Defence Force to intervene?
Yes. So MFAT at the moment is working through where those needs are for New Zealanders and what services are still being provided. So that's what we're working through at the moment. We, of course, are aware that with many border closures now coming into play, not least, of course, ours, that's changing the frequency of flights and the availability of flights. So MFAT are working actively on that now.
Given what we know about the connection between the infections we have here in New Zealand and overseas travel, we've potentially got, thousands of people rushing home. Should those people go into isolation centres like Whangaparoa rather than private homes?
Well, ultimately, keeping in mind, Whangaparoa was for less than 200 people. You are right. Human behaviour means that New Zealanders who are abroad, many of which who will have been on holiday, travelling abroad and are looking out at what's happening around the world and realising that their ability to travel home is going to be seriously curtailed, are cutting short their trips and coming home. And you can absolutely understand that. Of course, we have an obligation to let New Zealanders come home. Every country is letting their people return, but we are putting in place, you may have seen some of the reports now of what is happening at the border. I've seen people talking about their experience now at the border, being constantly questioned about where they're self-isolating. In New Zealand, keeping people separate when they're returning home as they get to their final destination so they can then self-isolate in their homes. It is at a scale where that is the most practical response. We're then checking on them, and we're even doing spot checks using the police to make sure that that's where they are.
So Auckland Council today announcing that it's closing a number of facilities, libraries, gyms, rec centres, museum is closing, and Auckland University is having no face-to-face classes next week. Are we in essence moving to a lockdown situation by basically having a sinking lid on the places that people can go?
So we've given guidance which those individual institutions are now looking at and saying, can we meet the expectations of the Ministry of Health in the current situation we're in right now? So basically what the Ministry of Health said, yes, we basically put in a ceiling at 100 for gatherings, but here's the things you need to think about. And they included, if you needed to contact trace people who had come through your doors, can you do so? Can you keep people socially distanced when they're at your venues? Can you minimise that? And so organisations are making those decisions themselves. Like Te Papa, for instance, their view was people come in groups. They go and engage in interactive displays. There's a lot of contact between people. They didn't feel they could fulfil that advice. And so that's why we're seeing these decisions being made by those institutions.
Do you see a time, though, when everyone barring emergency and essential services may have to stay at home for a period of time? Shelter in place, as the Americans have called it.
Yep, and that, of course, depends where we are at, and this is where we've been acting a little bit differently to other countries. Most countries have moved after the effect. We've tried to be very preemptive, whereas some countries have had community transmission when they've moved on borders. We moved before that. Some have had community transmission when they've moved on mass gatherings. We've gone before that. We've tried to stay ahead of what might happen with our cases. We will keep looking to do that. So I really want to implore people, be prepared to work from home. Be prepared to cancel non-essential travel. When we're in the position to have to do that, we will give very strong advice on that. But in the meantime, be prepared.
So are you planning for the possibility of even regional shutdowns, different parts of New Zealand having to be closed off at certain points?
If we move into a phase of where we've got outbreaks in different parts of New Zealand, we should all be prepared for that. But we do have the ability to respond regionally. So that might, if we have community outbreaks in different parts of the country, then you might see an escalation to that kind of response. But continue to seek the advice and listen to the advice of what's coming through from the Ministry of Health and from the government, because we will give word when that's required. In the meantime, I'm just asking for everyone to be prepared.
So, just to be clear, Prime Minister, is there any evidence or suspicion that we have community transmission yet?
So we haven't. You would have been hearing from Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. That's what we assess every time we get our caseload. They're currently going through what I believe is the last 24 hours worth of caseload, but till now we haven't. But we constantly, even before then, we've been moving ahead of the curve. It's something that New Zealand's been in the position to do so, and not every country has. We want to keep doing that. That's how, when we get spikes, we can try and curtail them as quickly as we can so they just become small waves rather than big waves. So it might mean we have to step up our activity, and then once we see those waves come down, we can loosen up again. So that's the framework we need to work to. Does mean we'll be doing it for a while though, Lisa.
So obviously people will have heard what you have said about schools, but they'll be wondering again how schools can remain open with all these, criteria about how far you should stay away from people, and with other big institutions closing. What is the difference? Why not shut schools now?
There's a couple of different things that we have to consider with schools. So actually the model that we're taking with mass gatherings and for trying to get ahead of any outbreaks is the same model that's been used in countries that have been pretty successful in managing COVID-19. That is, to date, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And what they've done with schools is where they've had a case connected to a school, then they shut down, which is what we did. So in Dunedin, when we had a case connected, we shut the school down. We did that for, 72 hours, and there's two reasons for that. That gives you enough time to contact trace, which is what we do with every case. We contact everyone that's been in close contact with that person, gives us time to clean the schools. We know COVID doesn't exist on surfaces after 72 hours. So even if you don't get a thorough clean, we know then it's a safe space. And then we open back up again. What we'll do is, of course, if we have community outbreak, then we'll treat schools differently. And we've sent that guidance out to schools so they can see the different levels and how we'll behave at those different levels with schools.
Are you actively Prime Minister, are you actively giving consideration to bringing forward school holidays or making them longer?
Well, at the moment, what we've wanted to do is stick to that framework. If we get a case, close it down, then reopen. If we have community outbreak, look at wider closures. The thing we have to keep in mind, Lisa, is that we may well, in fact, all of the evidence suggests we'll be dealing with COVID for some time. And so I know people are looking for us to give that clear guidance, and we are, but we have to remember that urgency that people are saying that they want every single school to shut before we have that community transmission. We have to think about the fact that we'll be managing COVID around the world, but potentially months. So we have to think in that frame of mind and how we can sustain our response through that whole period of time. One final point to remember about schools and, of course, children. Thankfully, COVID-19 doesn't have the same effect on children as others. In that sense, it isn't affecting children as badly as others. That doesn't mean, of course, we don't think about them as transmitters to others, but we have to think then about their ability to transmit to other people in their family. If they end up in school holidays with grandparents, we have to think about things like that too.
I know we're almost out of time, so if I could get a couple of quick answers on the next things. Do you think realistically it's game over for the Olympics?
Oh, to be honest, I've been so focused on our response, it's not something I've given much thought. But based on the current trajectory, it means surely to everyone it probably seems unlikely.
Election date, do you reckon it will go ahead on the planned date, or there's possibility it will be moved?
No intention of changing that at this point.
Hey, and what happens if you get a cold?
Oh, well, I will do the same thing I'm asking all New Zealanders to do. I'll restrict my contact with other people. We're saying to people, if you're sick, stay home. I'm setting up provisions so that I can work from anywhere, and that's a really important part for me of making sure that we've got good continuity plans, but it'll be pretty hard to keep me wherever I am from doing my job.
Thank you so much for joining us, because I know you are incredibly busy. That is the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, low decile schools could act as food hubs for communities in need if schools have to go into lockdown. Noise complaints about Christchurch's Eagle helicopter skyrocket. And 41 years after the release of My Sharona, it's back, but not as you may remember it. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The total number of coronavirus cases has risen today from 28 to 39, and some of them may be the first in this country to have been caused by community transmission. At this stage, health officials are unable to deny that possibility. Samoa has declared a state of emergency from midnight tonight to help combat COVID-19. The Prime Minister, Tuilaepa Sailele Malielegaoi, announced the measures will be in effect for 14 days. The order includes shutting down the border for all except returning Samoan citizens and a ban on gatherings of more than 5. Earlier, Tonga's Prime Minister, Pohiva Tu'ionetoa, also declared a state of emergency, banning all foreign nationals from entering the kingdom until April the 17th. There have been no confirmed cases in Tonga so far. The National Museum Te Papa Tongarewa is closing to the public from 6 p.m. and will stay shut for at least 2 weeks to help reduce the risk of COVID-19. Board Chair Dame Fran Wild says it's unable to enforce social distancing and the well-being of the public must be the number one focus. Up to 600 staff will keep working in the museum's Wellington offices. Meanwhile, the Auckland Council closes its libraries, pools and recreational centres today for an initial period of 2 weeks. The city's War Memorial Museum, Art Gallery and Maritime Museum will also close, but the zoo is staying open. India has executed 4 men for a notorious gang rape and murder on a bus in Delhi in 2012. The men were hanged at dawn in a prison in the city after their final appeals for clemency were dismissed. The victim, a 23-year-old physiotherapy student who cannot be named under Indian law, died from her injuries 9 days after being raped. 2 people have been found to have intentionally lit fires in the Tinder-Dry Tasman area last year. A short time ago, the jury in the High Court in Wellington found both Benjamin Durant and Abigail Page guilty on arson charges. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for joining us. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time for business now and another busy day on the markets. Nona Peltier's joined us to break it all down for us, Nona.
Well, I'll do my very best, but some of it might be a little over my head.
I doubt that very much. Okay, so Reserve Bank has moved to help the financial markets cope better. What's happened?
Yeah, so the U.S. Federal Reserve has done a deal with 9 countries to swap collateral in exchange for U.S. dollars. Yep. So basically, they're saying you guys need more U.S. dollars to settle your accounts because, we're an export-led nation and we need those U.S. dollars because commodities are traded in U.S. dollars. And we spoke yesterday about how there weren't enough U.S. dollars and that was driving up demand for them and also the price because everything has a price. So overnight, the Reserve Bank had, as one of the parties to this deal, as is Australia, Mexico, Brazil, and Sweden, a few others. Well, there were 9 in all, and we got $30 billion, an access to $30 billion US dollars, and that has allowed New Zealand to provide for the flow of that currency. So it's opened up the market so that people have the ability to transact their buys and sells, basically, which is great. That helped the New Zealand dollar in a way that was, just as spectacular as the fall we saw. So we saw that New Zealand dollar fall to levels we hadn't seen since 2009, and we saw the Australian dollar fall to levels that not seen for almost 18 years. That's now reversed a little bit. And
so what were we down to, about 55?
Something like that. Yesterday, but we'd gone further down than that. At the moment, one of these papers has my numbers on them. 57.4. So we gained a couple cents at least from yesterday, and when I was last looking, the dollar was still trending up. And again, against the Australian dollar, it settled back. So we're like about 98 Australian at the moment. So we lost So we basically all of this moving around. Now, when I say all this moving around, these are big, in fact, percentage movements. And
because people will look at the cents
and they'll say that's not much. Yes. But it is a lot when you consider all the moving parts, everything moving around. Now, that helped the markets. We saw the New Zealand market open very strongly on this Reserve Bank deal because that helps everybody, right? And but then, for some reason, unlike the rest of Asia, we soured somewhat, and the gain we had early morning, which was the NZX was up 1%, a little bit more actually. But this afternoon, it was down, and I thought, wow, gee, I wonder what happened here, because the rest of the market seemed to be up. But then, just like within the last 15 minutes before the market closed, it went from down 0.3%, up 0.3%, and then it finished up exactly where it started, up 1%. Goodness knows. I mean, it's hard to keep up.
Every day's a roller coaster
Hard
ride.
to keep up. And that's just like in 15 minutes. So, it's really exextraordinary.
And so we finished up with the points and...
so I'll give you guys those numbers, but look, there's some things that... A lot of other things were moving
and
around.
Air New Zealand was happening and all the rest of it.
So Air New Zealand was in a trading halt for 4 days, as we know, and then they came back to the market with a deal that the government had made, well, the government being a shareholder. So the deal is really a transaction try not thinking about it as a government bailout, but as a shareholder bailout, more to the point, which is still us, but it's a little bit different.
It's a crown loan. It's taxpayers' money.
Well, yes, except that it's being repaid at a very hefty interest rate of something like about 7%. So it's not exactly a gift. Air New Zealand's going to have to earn the money to pay that back. And it's going to be tough because their flights, and I'm sure we've heard already that internationally, last week they were talking about how the virus had knocked about 10% of their
and it's worse,
revenue. About 85% now of their international revenue, and something between 60 and 70% of their domestic. And they're expecting to see further falls there. So even though, it's a good deal, Air New Zealand's going to continue to trade, they opened up once the trading held down 45%, and they finished down about 36%. Massive numbers.
Yeah.
And Tourism Holdings was another company that came.
So this is your camper van.
These are the camper van people came back today and said, okay, look, we're not going to pay our dividend, and we're going to cut our directors' fees by 50%, plus the chief executive's salary for the next 4 months by 50%. Our executive salaries are going to be cut by 30%. We're going to have to lay off some staff, etc., etc. But the market liked that. It finished up 12%.
Up 12%. We should mention Air New Zealand also canned, part of the deal is that they can their interim dividend and
all that other stuff.
And the full year gone.
But we had some of that stuff earlier. Yeah. So there's so much we could probably spend 15 minutes just talking about their last trading update.
Yeah.
And Michael Hill, again, they came back with an update today which said they were going to close all of their Canadian stores. On the guidance of the Health Canada. And then they said, foot traffic is down everywhere, but finished up 32%. I don't know what.
Maybe they're relying on online sales anyway.
I have no idea. Well, it's gold, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. Okay. So overall then, ended up, NZX Top 50 Index ended up the week 1%, today rather, 87 points up to 9,202.
Right. So we're hovering around that 9,000 mark. Yeah.
Well, for now, but don't worry. 12,000 is still, in our history now. So we will get back there, I'm sure, one day. And then in late afternoon trading, the key was trading at 57.4 US cents, 98 Australian, and always steady at 49.4 British pounds.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our market update. A man who deliberately lit fires in Tinderdry, Tasman last year initially posed as a frightened resident who had to be evacuated from his home. Benjamin Durant and Abigail Page have been on trial for lighting a fire on the side of Motiri Highway in late February, 3 weeks after a huge blaze started in Pigeon Valley. A short time ago, a jury in their High Court trial in Wellington found them guilty of arson and lighting another fire on Pigeon Valley Road in early March. Most residents who had to evacuate their homes in Tasman's Redwood Valley when the fire broke out. Durant was interviewed by RNZ reporter Katie Scotcher as firefighters fought the blaze. He told her he had to leave in such a hurry he didn't have time to grab a shirt before evacuating his property.
I didn't want to go. I wanted to water the property down. Got quite a few valuables, and they were going to arrest me, so I had to go, or I was going to get arrested. So it was pretty much drop everything and go.
What's going on here at the moment? I hear some hose pipes and stuff.
Yeah, I had the hoses going since it's the old house, over 100 years old, the old post office, so just trying to wetten things down and didn't even get time to turn them off, the taps really, and just, pretty much shunted out the gate and that was it.
Second time that you have been evacuated and now returned home in a matter of weeks. What does that feel like? Can you describe that experience for us?
Oh, yeah, it's horrible. Just lucky to have a place, really. Feel sorry for those ones that have lost everything, and everyone's on edge, I suppose.
You've rushed home pretty quickly this evening. What made you want to return home? A couple of the residents kind of further up aren't returning this evening. Why did you want to return home so quickly?
I just got a lot of valuables here, and hoses were on and chocks down the back.
Were you prepared from the last time that you had to evacuate? Did you have go bags ready and all your valuables together?
No, not at all. Everything was back where it was, and it just had no time. The fire just come up over the hill that quick, and it was just, if it come this way, we just needed to get out of here, and it was just drop everything. I ended up leaving without a t-shirt, just in my shorts, and it was just full on trying to get everything ready, trying to get the Harley out the shed. It was like the Harley or the Valiant had to drive, so I couldn't drive them both.
Are you worried that you're going to have to evacuate again?
I hope not, anyway. There's a lot of grass, and it could A big fight could come this way. Anything's possible, really.
And that was Benjamin Durant speaking to RNZ reporter Katie Scotcher. He has just been found guilty of deliberately lighting fires in Tinderdry, Tasman last year after a High Court trial in Wellington. Durant and his co-offender will be sentenced at a later date. Low decile schools could act as food hubs for communities in need if schools have to go into lockdown to stop the spread of COVID-19. Schools are figuring out how to teach students from home if they are shut down, and that's caused some anxiety that students who rely on their schools for meals could go hungry. But the charity Kids Can says it will make sure the families who need the kai most will get it, even if closures are put in place. Our reporter Katie Doyle and cameraman Nick Monroe filed this report.
The school holidays are just around the corner, but Kids Can CEO Julie Chapman says schools are already worried for what next term will bring amid COVID-19.
Many families are facing job losses. They're very worried about how children are going to still access food, and they're also telling us that they believe the need will increase significantly.
Schools in the United Kingdom have now shut due to the virus, and certain states in America are following suit. New Zealand schools remain open. However, in the event of a closure, Kids Can has a plan to ensure food and sanitary supplies remain available.
We will do everything that we can to make sure that their children don't go hungry. It's what we set up to do. We will buy extra food if we have to, and we'd certainly love to talk to government about how we could also work together as the need increases. The key to all of this is looking at how we can use schools as a hub to distribute to their local communities. We've been looking at what organisations are doing overseas, and that seems to be a good way for families and children to continue to access items that they do need. So I think, we would still be able to supply those basics like food and sanitary items, raincoats and shoes where possible.
More than 780 schools and 55 early childcare centres rely on Kids Can for food and essentials. And there are fears the need will only grow as COVID-19 leads to job losses. One of the schools that rely on Kids Can is Mercer. Its principal, Paula Faitala, says families here are already feeling the pinch.
Families are worried about incomes, and rightfully so, because it's unknown, it's uncharted waters. The second concern is generally around without income, how do we provide for our families? And I think that's a countrywide concern. And without a word of a lie, conversations around the panic buying. Some people can't afford to bulk buy, some live week to week, and that needs to be something that's considered.
To keep families from falling further below the poverty line, Mercer is already sending some of the food from Kids Can home with its students. And if school does have to shut, Ms Faitala says Mercer will act as a hub for essential items so families don't go without.
From my team and myself delivering it, whether we have distribution around the school so people aren't in close vicinity, if that's what is required, but we would have food here and we would allow people to access it either here or we'd take it off site for them.
There has been no announcement from the Ministry of Education about widespread closures. However, it is encouraging schools to examine their capacity for at-home learning. So for now, the students here at Mercer are still in school, eating their Kids Can baked beans and making the most of the multicoloured playground. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. If you live in Auckland, how will it affect you that the council's shutting up shop for libraries, the museum is closing and some rec centres and gyms? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We would love your suggestions, your go-to for amusement or a trip outside if you're allowed to leave home. Where should we be going? In Christchurch, noise complaints about the police Eagle helicopter have skyrocketed. Sitting at 39 just a week ago, as of Wednesday night, they had almost doubled as residents registered their annoyance with the City Council. This as the 5-week trial of the chopper comes to an end and the region's top cop says he wants it to become a permanent feature in the skies above the city. Conan Young reports.
That's the sound Shane Hollis says has been waking his partner and their 3 school-aged children late at night.
It's rattling our windows, and also because it's travelling late at night, it's disturbed our kids' sleep, it's disturbed our sleep, and it's kind of like having a highway suddenly built near you, a lot more noise happening. Our experience of it is that our kids are very aware of it, and it reminds them of shootings and earthquakes, and their friends are also quite upset by it.
Mr Hollis has laid a complaint with the Police Complaints Authority, but has already been told the helicopter is being used appropriately. He's been following its movements on an aircraft tracking website and begs to differ. He says the police promised it would fly at an altitude of 1,500 metres as much as possible in order to reduce the noise. Instead, he says it's flown much lower on a regular basis, often even below the 300 metres the CAA says helicopters should fly in residential areas.
I don't need to know specifically what the operational necessity is, because I understand the police have a need to keep certain parts of their operation maybe not as public. However, I would like to have some assurance actually that they're working on a specific job, not just loitering around. Whereas the tracks of their flights show that they're just part of a wider flight. It's not a specific go somewhere and do something flight. They're just hovering around and watching stuff.
Jenny Crooks says when the pilot first started, she was hearing the chopper 5 to 6 times a day. She says the sound penetrated inside her double-glazed home and set off her 2 Great Danes, who would bark and upset the neighbours.
So it does get rather aggravating, and sometimes at night you would hear it as well, quite late at night, and you think, oh, blimey. And it just became a bit intrusive and annoying.
Jenny Crooks worries the Eagle is being overused, and in situations where officers on the ground might be more effective and cause less disruption. She's no problem with it being used for genuine emergencies.
But as far as the sound goes and getting adjusted to it, it is the equivalent of having a patrol car going with its sirens up and down past your house 5 or 6 times a day, and it doesn't make you feel secure. It makes you think that something is going on, and either that or that you're in a bad neighbourhood. So I don't think people will adjust to that.
Canterbury District Commander Superintendent John Price says in the first 4 weeks of the pilot, the Eagle responded to 305 requests for help and assisted with 210 arrests. He insists it's only been used when necessary and has not been deployed more than it normally would be in order to bolster the case for its staying in the city permanently.
There will be a small minority of that with it to be directly life-threatening, but you just do not know. Any job that police could go to could end up being a job where someone's life is at risk. We're also there to protect property, so a lot of those jobs are also about preventing people from breaking into people's homes, breaking into people's vehicles.
John Price says wherever possible, it is staying above 1,500 metres to reduce noise, but sometimes this can't be avoided.
How many noise complaints have been made for barking dogs in that same time? I get that noise is an element that a lot of people are concerned with. That's all part of the review and the assessment process that we will go through to determine if this air support unit is good for the people of Canterbury.
Today is the Eagle's last day on the job before it heads back to Auckland. Police National Headquarters will next review public feedback and look at its effectiveness as a crime-fighting tool before deciding if Christchurch should get its own Eagle helicopter. Kei o te tahi ahau, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Wellington College has embarked on a digital learning trial today to prepare for being closed if there was to be a widespread outbreak of COVID-19 in New Zealand. Teachers were live streaming from their kitchens while their pupils followed along with the lesson from their bedrooms. Reporter Harry Locke went along to find out how the lessons were getting on.
Kia ora guys, I'm just getting started here. I'm just going to pop up the title screen so you can see what's going on. Sorry about the delay. Okay. So
teaching from the kitchen table. Not a standard lesson, but a possible sign of things to come. With schools in the UK closing today, schools in New Zealand are trying to anticipate a similar move over here and preparing themselves for that eventuality. Wellington College maths teacher Kushla Thompson is having her first go at teaching her Year 10 class out of her house in Northland.
We're going to do like terms. So we've got 24x minus 6xy plus 5z minus 1.
It's all fairly high-tech. 2 computer screens in front of her. One, a tablet where she can write algebra equations and talk the students through it at the same time. The other is YouTube, where a live stream of those equations and her voice show up, for the viewing pleasure of all the students on the other end. On the side, there's a column where the pupils can post their answers and questions. Mrs. Thompson says they've been preparing for the day throughout the week.
It's been quite a full-on week for teachers at school, but we really want to give this a go for planning, because we know some stuff is going to work well today and we know some stuff is not going to work so well. We want to get feedback from the boys on what's happening.
She says she's fully aware it's not the same as standing at the front of a class and interacting with the pupils face to face.
One of the hardest things about going to online learning is that there are lots of great platforms for delivering content. But when you're in a classroom, it's not really about that. It's about having a relationship with the teacher, and most importantly with the teacher checking for your understanding. It's definitely more work than just making a whole lot of videos, but we'll see if it's worth it. Right, now let's do the next one. So let's do 2Y.
It's an experiment, and Mrs. Thompson says she's keen to find out what the students make of it. On the other end of the video, a couple of kilometres away in Karori, 14-year-old Manu Nicholson Cuevas is sat at his desk in his bedroom, in shorts and a t-shirt. He's happy with how the lesson went.
It's kind of the same, just I think it's better. Like, I thought it was going to be quite complicated in some ways.
Better than you thought it was going to be?
Yeah. She's a good teacher as well, like from home, at school. Yeah, so it's going good.
His classmate James Kirkland is sat in another house in Karori, watching the same video, doing the same work. He wasn't as glowing about it as Manu.
It was pretty good, but it wasn't as good as being in the class, because she's up there and you can see her like writing everything physically, and it's a better feeling rather than through a screen, because you're not actually communicating with her.
New guidelines have recently been put out by the government for schools to follow, depending on the scenario. Specific recommendations are given in the guidelines, from whether there is someone with no symptoms but was in contact with a positive case, in which case get the person to self-isolate, to whether multiple families from the same school have tested positive for coronavirus, in which case close the school down for 72 hours. In the event of community transmission, it says all schools in the area should close for 14 days, with the decision to be reviewed every 2 weeks. James' mother, Nick Kirkland, says she's worried about how it would affect the boys.
It's great that the school's done this as a trial to iron out any problems that might happen, but it's concerning that it might happen long term, because, they just don't have that social interaction.
This is just a trial, but it's being done with a very serious motivation, to make sure the school is equipped to deal with being closed down. And in this lesson, it seems everyone is learning something. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
A new hero has emerged in the rush to protect ourselves from the coronavirus. As we know, there's been a rush on at supermarkets and pharmacies for hand sanitisers, and access to the stuff is drying up. Step up, gin makers in a number of countries. The main ingredient in hand sanitiser is alcohol, and gin makers have a lot of it. Deutsche Welle's Hannah Cleaver explains.
Gin and hand sanitiser, supplies for the pandemic, now available at the same spot. It's all about alcohol, and these people are specialists. But while gin is about 40% alcohol, virus-killing hand sanitiser needs to be at least 60%.
Well, basically we're actually using the same ingredients. So for all intent and purposes, you could say it's a very, very strong gin. We would absolutely not recommend anyone to drink it.
This Irish distillery has stopped making new batches of gin altogether. It's now all about hand sanitiser.
What we've sold is a fraction of what's needed, as an absolute fraction of what's needed. So so again, there are loads of other distilleries that can do this and that are doing this, not just in Ireland.
Across the Atlantic, this gin distillery in Pennsylvania is doing the same thing.
We have shifted focus from making beverage alcohol products and put 100% of our resources towards making hand sanitizer for our community.
The labels for their new product line don't even have prices. After seeing people selling sanitizer online for hundreds of dollars, the boss here decided to give it away.
I was Googling how much is hand sanitizer, and we came up with the very first result on Google was $328 for a 1 ounce bottle. I think that's ridiculous, it's shameful, and we want to be the antidote to that. We want to provide hand sanitizer to anybody that needs it. We want to push it out to our charity partners, our local partners that we work with every single day.
The attitude here is a tonic in these days of pandemic price gouging for basic products to keep people safe.
And that was Hannah Cleaver with that report. A lot of you have been contacting us here at Checkpoint wondering how many of the people infected with COVID-19 have recovered already. Now, Dr Bloomfield, the Director General of Health, says the Ministry of Health hasn't been collecting that information as it requires health officials to go back to the clinicians looking after those people. But he says it is looking at how they can collect that and have it reported routinely. So we are pretty hopeful that Checkpoint can start to update you on that with a breakdown of the numbers, i.e. the people who are still suffering from COVID-19 and the ones who have recovered. Someone else has got in touch to say they're sceptical about the number of cases. More on that later.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Prime Minister says organisations are making their own calls about whether they can meet COVID-19 social distancing guidelines. Auckland's libraries, pools and recreational centres are closing for 2 weeks, as is Te Papa in Wellington. Jacinda Ardern told Checkpoint this isn't a sign the country is in essence moving to a lockdown, it's just organisations assessing their obligations.
If you needed to contact trace people who had come through your doors, can you do so? Can you keep people socially distanced when they're at your venues? Can you minimise that? And so organisations are making those decisions themselves.
Jacinda Ardern says people should be prepared for a possible community outbreak, but says it will be well signalled. Christchurch's public facilities will remain open, with attendance numbers being kept to 100 to comply with government guidelines. Mary Richardson, who heads the City Council's COVID-19 team, says staff are making some changes to how facilities operate in order to keep them open. The changes affect the libraries, service centres, pools and recreation centres, the Christchurch Art Gallery and the Botanic Gardens Visitors Centre. Councils are being advised to suspend all future citizenship ceremonies. The Department of Internal Affairs says with more than 6,500 people due to become citizens at public ceremonies in the coming months, it will be difficult to stay at safe distances from each other. A spokesperson, Jeff Montgomery, says most councils have already cancelled upcoming ceremonies, but a handful are planning to go ahead. The Ministry of Health denies there is a shortage of personal protective equipment gear such as gloves, masks and aprons needed to protect healthcare workers from catching the coronavirus. District health boards have reported that some equipment has been left so long it has perished, but the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says all DHBs have enough stock and they are constantly getting more.
There are 2 or 3 DHBs I understand where their stocks of PPE, particularly masks, were so old that the elastic had perished. That's been now replaced, and as I say, in terms of masks, we have good production here onshore, so that's helpful.
Ashley Bloomfield says a factory in Whanganui can produce 200,000 masks a day, which will keep up supply. A Christchurch couple trapped in a remote part of Chile say they are frustrated by the lack of official information from New Zealand consular services. Mark Watson and Hannah Black, who have spent the past 4 years cycling from Alaska to Chile, had intended to fly home via Buenos Aires. But since Air New Zealand suspended all services from Argentina for 90 days, they are effectively stuck.
We're not hearing a whole lot from the consulate, really, that we should just be putting pressure on the airlines to find out what's going on. But despite Air New Zealand cancelling our flight, they haven't contacted us. The only thing we can find out via the app is that they're processing a change.
Mark Watson says they are in a remote part of Patagonia. A man who deliberately lit fires in Tinderdry, Tasman last year initially posed as a frightened resident who had to be evacuated from his home. Benjamin Durant and Abigail Page have been on trial for lighting a fire on the side of Moutere Highway in late February last year, 3 weeks after a huge blaze started in Pigeon Valley. A short time ago, the jury in their High Court trial in Wellington found them guilty of arson. Durant was among residents forced to evacuate because of the fire, and this is what he told RNZ at the time.
The fire just come up over the hill that quick, and it was just, if it come this way, we just needed to get out of here, and it was just drop everything. I ended up leaving without a T-shirt, just my shorts, and it was just full on trying to get everything ready.
Benjamin Durant, who made that comment a year ago and has now been found guilty of arson. It's 4 minutes past 6. The Netball Players Association has backed Netball New Zealand's decision to postpone the ANZ Premiership for 2 weeks, now that indoor gatherings of more than 100 people have been banned by the government. The decision will be reviewed in just over a week. The association's executive manager, Steph Bond, says it will be consulted again.
We have been consulted all week, and we've had many calls and discussions, so absolutely the players' views and position are definitely taken into account when these decisions are being made.
The Warriors' chief executive Cameron George says all the players are committed to seeing out the NRL season in Australia despite the evolving coronavirus situation. George says the NRL needs the Warriors and his club is ready to respond to the call.
Not one of them are wavering from this commitment to the NRL to keep this competition alive in challenging times. They've called on us, and now it's our time to stand up and be proud and deliver and be leaders.
The Warriors play their home game against the Canberra Raiders on the Gold Coast on Saturday night. The National Basketball League's General Manager Justin Nelson is confident it can survive its latest setback. The financially challenged league won't start on time next month because of COVID-19, but Nelson hopes to get some form of competition running later this year. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nadia Reid selects the mixtape. Country Life visits New Zealand's first spirulina farm. I wonder how many they're getting to the acre. Luke Thompson is our Friday Night Live act, and we're going through the square window for this week's Sonic Tonic. Although given how COVID-19 is forcing us to self-isolate, we'll be encouraging you to think outside the box. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Scattered showers clearing and becoming fine tonight, but isolated showers remaining in Northland. For Bay of Plenty, isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, showers developing tonight, clearing early tomorrow. They're mainly fine with areas of cloud about the west coast. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland mainly fine. Rain spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms from tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough, some showers developing. Fine weather tomorrow, but then cloud increasing and scattered rain developing from late afternoon. Canterbury mostly cloudy. Any remaining areas of drizzle clearing. Scattered rain developing from about midday tomorrow. Otago and Southland fine today. Cloud with scattered rain tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, a period of rain, then a few showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And you're with Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Calm down and shop normally. That's the message from supermarket owners today as they rush to assure New Zealanders there is more than enough food in the country. Shoppers have encountered empty shelves over the past week as panic buying broke out as the COVID-19 case numbers rose and people tried to stock up. Today, the major supermarket chains joined forces to spread the word that they have more than enough stock. They just can't get it onto the store shelves as fast as it's flying out the door. Logan Church reports.
Strong words of assurance today from Foodstuffs Managing Director Steve Anderson.
Our people are working tirelessly to move large volumes of product through the system to meet our customers' needs. And once again, we encourage New Zealanders to shop normally.
The major supermarkets in New Zealand penned a public letter today saying people needed to shop as they normally would and resist stockpiling. They say the empty shelves are not a supply problem, but instead one of demand, and Foodstuffs is trying to ramp up its logistics network.
We believe we're okay in terms of truck drivers right now, but we are reaching out to logistics providers who aren't working right now in the forestry sector and the like. But we're just slightly above a Christmas week. Our biggest issue, so we can handle these sorts of volumes, but we plan for a long time for Christmas. The issue here is that it's arrived and it's unplanned.
But Mr. Anderson says his staff are working long hours and it's taking its toll.
My biggest concern right now, I think, is the tiredness of my teams. Really, really proud of what they've done, but they're getting really tired. So that's the be kind message. So hopefully people do that.
Checkpoint visited several supermarkets today as many shoppers were wheeling out trolleys filled with groceries.
I have bought a lot of frozen foods and I have bought 14 bottles of wine because that to me is the most important thing. I've also stocked up on hand wash, tissues, toilet paper, and baking items so that I can bake food.
Are you expecting to come back here anytime soon?
No, hoping not to come back for about 3 weeks. It's only going to get worse once if schools close and once people start working from home, because when people are at home they'll be bored and they'll be coming to supermarkets. So I've taken today off work to come stock up and hopefully we'll get through it.
Inside this Hutt Valley Pack and Save, produce aisles were filled as well as milk fridges, and there was some bread. Many products had restrictions of 4 per customer, but at the baking aisle, staples like plain flour were nowhere to be seen.
I've got pretty much all of the stuff that I would just normally buy. I haven't gone crazy and tried to get like really high quantities of anything. Probably a few more tins and stuff that lasts a bit longer than maybe I normally would, but otherwise just the normal stuff.
Are some people coming out with large trolleys of
It does
groceries?
look pretty crazy.
In Wainuiamata, its local supermarket had more empty shelves. Chicken breasts gone, beef mince gone, soap gone. There was also very little flour and no yeast. Lines of shelves that were usually filled with pasta were almost empty. Outside, shopper Rob was packing his groceries into his car boot. He was trying to make sure he had enough, but also be sensible with his purchases.
5 bags of porridge, 1 small round of cheese, some extra coffee, another loaf of bread, some biscuits for my coffee, and the rest is at home.
Seeing some of the empty shelves inside, does that worry you at all?
No, because I know that there's more stuff coming in.
As COVID-19 cases continue to rise, the plea of supermarket owners is simple. Calm down, shop normally, and all will be fine. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
The forecast for businesses around the country is growing bleaker each day as efforts to contain COVID-19 ramp up. Businesses will receive the lion's share of the mega $12.1 billion economic rescue package announced earlier this week. Wage subsidies capped at $150,000 are on the table for any business that can show turnover has dropped by 30% or more. It's the lifeline many businesses need, but it won't be enough for some who are shutting their doors for good. Annika Smith reports.
COVID-19 messages blare out of an intercom across Auckland Airport's international terminal. Outside, Gary Singh sits in his cab halfway down the taxi rank. There's always a wait for a job, but these days it's grown to 6 hours.
The business is really down. In the taxi business, you don't know what you're going to get at, and it's just your luck, And I wait for 6 hours, I got a short fare, and then I come back, then I just only in 12 hours I did 2 fares only, like waiting for at least 6 hours. So the business is going really down.
Further down the rank, Jaspal Singh says work dried up 2 weeks ago.
Very, very quiet, man. Very, very quiet. It's pretty hard to survive. No work in the city, no work at the airport. So it's pretty hard to make money.
As of midnight last night, the government closed the border to anyone who is not a New Zealand citizen or permanent resident. The tighter border measures mean less foot traffic for taxi drivers, and money isn't making it further afield either. Y Hospitality Group owns 4 Queenstown restaurants, which have been hit hard as visitors dry up. Co-owner Martin James is a chef by trade and has a young family.
We started with 1 restaurant, and over the years we've built up to own 4 with my business partners, and we've got staff that have been with me for 17 years, and they've all got new mortgages and just got into their first house, and they've got young families, 1 2-year-old children. So, it's really stressful. Like, where do we go from here? When will trade return?
Even with the government support, they've lost about a third of their staff, and they're mostly visa holders.
Their families are a long way away, and with the borders shutting, they're very scared. Some have already left and tried to get out of New Zealand and get home as quick as they could, which is very sad to see such a great team breaking up.
Local cafe The Exchange would usually be humming with tourists and locals grabbing kai or coffee, but owner-operator Samantha Lalive says it's a very different picture at the moment.
It's dead. There's no one in there. Like, we've got a couple of
couple of tables in there, a few groups of locals having crisis meetings. I think that's what's keeping us going, the crisis meetings. But we've only had a couple of tables of tourists, and those guys have all said they're trying to get home now. Yeah, it's just dead.
Ms Lalive says the government's wage support means she doesn't have to consider letting go of staff yet. While the border closure will bite hard, she welcomes the news.
I'm a business owner and I normally get tourists, but I'm also a New Zealander and a mum, and I think that anything that needs to be done should be done, and we'll take the hit, we'll get through it, and hopefully on the other side, that's when we'll get people coming in, we'll get New Zealanders moving, coming to see us, enjoying our little town, and we'll build that way. But for the moment, I think people's health is definitely the priority.
The Reserve Bank has announced a broad range of measures to keep money flowing to banks and onto businesses and households. It's also taken steps to ensure a ready supply of US dollars for trade and business payments, as well as steps to lower short-term interest rates. Tourism Holdings Chief Executive Grant Webster says while cancellations have overtaken bookings, some visitors who arrived before the border closure are still making the most of the country's attractions.
So there are still people travelling around. There are still people visiting our activities and attractions and in our motorhomes. It would be fair to say that we are very much in drop-off mode now, where people are exiting, a number are exiting early and so forth.
Mr Webster says while business hasn't completely dried up, the company will be laying off staff and cutting costs in response to the downturn in business in New Zealand and further afield in Europe and the United States. I tāmaki makoto, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Annika Smith tēnei.
Care workers say a lack of communication from their employers is stoking fear among their patients that they will catch COVID-19 from their support workers. One carer RNZ spoke to says she still has no personal protective gear, despite requesting it from her employer. And both clients and carers say that the situation is making them reconsider whether they should still be having contact. Kate Newton reports.
Tamara has been a care support worker for 20 years, but the way she interacts with the people she cares for has changed dramatically in the last few weeks.
So one of them has now asked that, even though I use hand sanitizer in the car when I get there, when I get inside the house, the first thing I have to do is go and wash my hands, and then do their cares, washing hands in between different tasks, and then I'll wash my hands again as I leave, and then I'll get into my car and put hand sanitizer on as well, because I'm then going to be touching steering wheel, gear knob, whatever, to go to my next client. And if I have anything like a cough or a cold or a sniffle, I am to advise them and or keep away.
Tamara says she's chosen to take most of those precautionary measures herself, and there's been little guidance from the home support agency she works for. The only advice she's had was an email that explained hand washing techniques, pointed care workers to Ministry of Health guidelines, and suggested they look up infection control methods in their handbook.
We don't have a set workplace. Our workplace is our client's house, and we don't have regular team meetings or staff meetings or get-togethers or conversations and discussions about how do we cope with this, or how would we cope if there was an earthquake, or what do we do if, whatever happens. It's just a matter of read your handbook and be in touch with the office if you're not sure.
She says she's requested personal protective gear, including gloves, hand sanitizer and disposable aprons, but hasn't heard anything back about when or if she'll receive it. In the meantime, she's paying for those items herself. Wellington woman Lisa Much, who has metastatic breast cancer, has found friends are now reluctant to visit her in case they pass on the virus, but she still has a visit from a care worker once a day. Ms Much says carers make a huge difference to hers and other people's lives, but she's worried about her options if COVID-19 begins to spread in the community.
I, like others, will have to think about whether we keep having these people coming into our homes, if we can manage without them. Lots of people won't be able to manage without them, but I know that, a lot of the older people that they're going to are pretty scared at the moment. So, it's, if everybody else is keeping me at arm's length, should I be letting these people into the house who are going, from sick person to sick person?
She says she's contacted Access Community Health, the agency that provides her care, and has received some advice on what she should do as a patient. But Ms March says she still doesn't know what advice carers themselves are getting.
I wanted some sort of assurance that they had talked to staff about what options were for them to be paid if they were sick, so that they would feel like they could afford to stay at home if they needed to. Unlike people turning up at the office coughing and sneezing, Access don't have any method of knowing if staff are going to work sick.
Tamara, the care worker, says her agency and others need to get clear advice out to their employees and work with DHBs to source protective gear for workers. Access Community Health Chief Executive Alison Van Wyck says workers who haven't received personal protective gear, or PPE, should follow up with their local offices, but it may not be appropriate in every circumstance.
We are strongly using the Ministry of Health guidelines around where PPE is actually used to make sure it is being used where it is needed most. And that is absolutely vital. So checking in with the DHBs regionally is what we're doing around making sure that we can get access to it when it is needed, and making sure that we protect the teams where it is appropriate.
Mrs Van Wyck says her organisation is taking other precautions.
When our support workers arrive, we are asking them to call out to the clients, if it's appropriate, to call out to the clients to make sure everybody's well in the house. And if not, and we step back, the support worker steps back out of the house and contacts us within our call centre. And we actually make contact directly with the client to ascertain what their concern is, so that we can advise our support worker appropriately.
Alison Van Wyck says she's been talking to the Ministry of Health and DHBs about how to ensure the care support workforce remains sustainable if people become ill or have their working hours cut. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Kate Newton tēnei.
It is 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The numbers of COVID-19 cases across the Pacific have risen to 26, with 5 more people testing positive in French Polynesia today. Tonga and Samoa have declared states of emergencies. Foreign nationals have been barred from entering the countries, and restrictions have been placed on public gatherings. Fiji has had its first confirmed case, and a person in Samoa is awaiting test results. And as RNZ Pacific's Dominic Godfrey reports, health officials across the Pacific Islands are racing to stop the virus spreading because they won't have intensive care facilities to cope.
Most confirmed coronavirus cases in the Pacific are in territories with domestic links outside of the region. There are 12 in the US territory of Guam, 6 in French Polynesia, and 2 in New Caledonia. Fiji's one confirmed case is a national who'd recently returned from abroad, and last night Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama announced further measures to restrict travel from at-risk countries effective from today.
Our border restrictions on mainland China, Italy, Iran, Spain and South Korea will be extended to foreign nationals who have been present in the United States of America and all of Europe, including the United Kingdom, within 14 days of their intended travel to Fiji.
Further, anyone entering Fiji from any overseas port will be required to self-isolate for 14 days. New Zealand's announcement last night of border closures affects all in the Pacific except the 3 realm countries. Niue and Cook Islands can only be accessed via New Zealand, and Tokelau via Samoa. Families on Niue say students in Fiji are being repatriated via tomorrow's Air New Zealand flight from Auckland. In the Cook Islands, further steps are being taken to isolate the Paenua, or outer islands, from the main island Rarotonga from tomorrow to prevent any possible spread of COVID-19. The country's health secretary, Dr. Josephine Omer Herman, says health officials visited the outer islands last week by plane to ensure their preparedness.
There will not be any more travel to the Paenua unless they have undertaken a 14-day supervised quarantine period in Rarotonga. And the whole purpose around this is to provide the Paenua a safeguard so that we can pretty much avoid the virus going to the Paenua.
Dr. Omer Herman says they've been managing a cultural shift in the country so people behave like the disease is already on island. She says for her country, where there is no intensive care facility, they need a whole-of-country response. Tonga's health boss, Dr. Siale Akaola, says intensive and critical care capacity is an issue for across the region.
We have limited capacity, I think, to be frank. We are set up okay if cases are mild or moderate. Even if things escalate, that can be managed at these isolation centers. But of course, if it needs critical care, then that's another story, because clearly we will not be ready for that stage.
Another issue for the region is testing for the illness. Fiji's the only country with facilities and can get same-day results, while all others must send samples to countries like New Zealand, and wait times are 3 to 5 days. Most countries have adopted travel bans or restrictions from at-risk countries and 14-day quarantines, while others, like Solomon Islands, are closing schools. And some good news for the Cook Islands. Rarotonga and Aitutaki's electricity supplier is offering free power to households until the end of June. Beyond the unprecedented health emergency, the financial impact due to the loss of tourism earnings and exclusion from seasonal worker schemes in New Zealand and Australia is yet to be assessed. For Checkpoint, this is Dominic Godfrey.
Let's get to some of your feedback now. This person says, I'm sceptical about the number of COVID-19 cases. My daughter hasn't been able to get herself and her family tested. A work colleague returned from China with a terrible illness and continued working. Now all her work colleagues are ill with COVID-19 type symptoms. Calls to the Healthline haven't been satisfactory and no offer of testing has been made. Another person says around the digital divide in schools that it is great to hear about the idea of food hubs and the move to arrange online learning. But we might also want to think about computer loans and Wi-Fi setups for children without access to the internet during this time. Lots of you getting in touch about the police helicopter in Christchurch. Barbara says, it's a bloody intrusion on my quiet life. There is no way they are flying at the height, they say. It's an intrusion to law-abiding citizens, once again, and we cater to the lowest common denominator. As a PTSD sufferer from the earthquakes, I am not happy that we are having this foisted on us. Someone else, though, says, great addition to crime fighting in Christchurch. Feels safer for having it in the city. Another listener, Anne, says, what is wrong with so many Christchurch people? I can't believe they are complaining about the police helicopter. Whenever I hear it going over, it gives me a feeling of security. And we have all been through things together. People should show some gratitude that this is keeping us safe. And this one says, it's not just about the noise irritation. I feel the eagle before I hear it. It immediately sends my body into fight or flight mode. Walking down the usually peaceful Bishopdale Mall, it hovers overhead with its glaring light. It keeps me on edge and re-traumatises. It is a great way to push people over the edge or out of their hometown. The Eagle's flights are often indiscriminate and below the regulated level, this person says. After the last hellish years, this is the last straw. Someone else, though, says absolutely keep the Christchurch police helicopter. And this person says there are noisy helicopters in my area on occasions. I don't mind them. In fact, they give me a sense of safety. It is good we have that crime fighting tool. And this one says people would complain if they were assaulted or burgled. I've lived in an area where the police helicopter flies overhead frequently. Cat didn't even budge, they say. Well, finally, a rather unorthodox ending to Checkpoint tonight. It has been a tough week for the country and there'll be some tough times ahead. But American artist Chris Mann has tried to make the best of the difficult situation in his self-isolation by creating a parody called My Corona, to the tune of the Knack's 1979 hit My Sharona. Tonight we're going to leave you with it from the Checkpoint team. Wash your hands, be kind, shop to buy only what you need, and have a safe weekend.
I need toilet paper, toilet paper, toilet paper. I'm out of toilet paper, it's my Corona. I need toilet paper, toilet paper, toilet paper. I'm out of toilet paper, it's my Corona.
Got to make a grocery run, well that sounds fun. Why am I out here risking my life? Corona, where's a goddamn parking space? Shit, I touched my face. Wait, I think I finally caught my Corona. Stop it, don't be manic, go inside. No organic, oh no, all GMO. Jesus Christ, now I panic, I'll die. My Corona.
Out of toilet paper, it's my Corona.
Don't come any closer, huh? what the hell? Yes, I'm stocking up on boxed white Corona. Nothing's making sense. No more friends, no more basketball kids are home from school. It's raining too, and I'm losing my mind. My Corona. My Corona.
I need toilet paper, toilet paper, toilet paper. I'm out of toilet paper. It's my Corona. I need toilet paper, toilet paper, toilet paper. I'm out of toilet paper. It's my Corona.
When you gonna get to me? Get to me. Is it just a matter of time, Corona? Will I kill my family in quarantine? Yep. Or is it just a game in my mind, Corona? Then there's Donald Trump. Why are you shaking hands and keep telling us nothing's up? That we're gonna be fine. What? My Corona. My Corona.
Out of toilet paper.
So sick of my Corona. Hey. My Corona.
Out of toilet paper.
My Corona.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The total number of coronavirus cases has risen today from 28 to 39, and health officials are yet to rule out the possibility some of them were caused by community transmission. The Prime Minister says it's up to organisations to decide if they can meet social distancing guidelines as recreational centres around the country announce closures. California's governor has told the state's 40 million residents to stay home for the foreseeable future. And a jury has found 2 people guilty of intentionally lighting fires in the Tinderdry, Tasman area last year. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Think about it like this. We've got 4.7 million Kiwis and we're shopping like there's 7 million of us. So that's a hell of a demand on our supply chain.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night